Imagine two people standing on the exact same street corner. So there's the same buildings, the same sky, and it's the same moment in time, but they're experiencing the same reality, which is real and is there, differently. One person sees a route to work, for example, that they've walked 1,000 times or driven if you're in the car. Another sees a neighborhood where they fell in love years ago, and maybe it led to heartbreak, or maybe it led to a bunch of cute little babies that they're now going to pick up from the nursery school. It's the same corner, different worlds, or the same world, but experienced differently. And this isn't about subjective and objective in any sense. It's about what I often call two different paths to the same lake, or, something very deep about how we make our way through the world and how this is ongoing from every moment we've ever been alive to whatever moment that is, or on the street corner, to everything that happens after. And it shapes what the world becomes for us, but also what the world becomes. Just that, what it becomes. So even though most of us who believe these kind of statements like all is one, or we think in philosophy that we're beyond dualism, we're not dualists anymore, all of us have still been trained to think in these either or scaffolds, these binaries or polarizations, because it's helped us come into awareness of the world. So subjective or objective, mind or body, self or world, real or illusion, me or you, all of these ways we structure and understand the world are really deep scaffolds that we don't notice anymore, and that we even use those scaffolds to try to talk about having somehow gone beyond them. So even when we try to escape these things by saying everything is one, or distinctions are illusions, we're actually still using those scaffolds, because we're assuming that this thinking self is somehow outside of all that, encountering and thinking about whatever it is. So the truth is actually really much harder to grasp, and it's very layered and multidimensional. And it's this experience that this self that we are right now, this thinking, everything I'm aware of right now, is really just the tip edge of a much deeper movement that is connected to even deeper movements, and so on and so forth. And the ways that we change this part of it are through those deeper ways, and that is how we're connected to one another, and it's inseparable, and we change one another through that, as that, actually. So if we keep using these old scaffolds of trying to be at one with the world or reject dualism, actually we're imposing that scaffold on to what we're talking about. So how do we ease out of that a little bit? Waymaking is one way I try to do it in philosophy and cognitive science, but I want to try to talk about it here in everyday life. So what if, we don't need to think about everything as one, because that implies there's something other than the one. What if the problem isn't that we make distinctions? What if those distinctions are actually sort of clues or portals or cues, or ways that we might begin to know more, sense more, feel more meaning, connect more to one another? That it's actually about the way we're approaching those contradictions or those oppositions or those polarities that makes them be that way. So what if the problem is that we think we have to choose between something like separation and unity, for example, or difference and sameness, when reality is more like making paths through and as an ongoing, ever-changing, never has been separated reality? It kind of is a different way to come at this, and it can sound very hard to get your head around at first, or it can just, if you aren't really looking at it deeply, it can seem really obvious or something, but it's actually really hard because what it means is not seeing beginnings and ends to just about anything. And that's a really hard thing for us to do. But I think, we might be laying down these ways for each other to be able to do that. So each encounter with what feels like contradiction or irreconcilable difference is actually a chance for us to expand what's possible, and for whatever life we're able to know as ourselves, and to know what self is from a different perspective. And so it's much more like our body is always us, and we're so often unaware of so much of it. I don't really say that right. So it's the same way that our body is always our body is always making way, but we're never really aware of all of it. We can't be. It's too much for us to know every single thing that's happening in our body right now, and that's fine. But just understanding that happens all the time also shows you that it's happening at a lot of different levels too, like with the body itself and what it's in. So waymaking is this different approach to philosophy that's trying to think of life as path making. But also that implies a lot of important ideas that are really different from thinking of things as points that can be understood as either or. It's not about finding true reality. It's about understanding how we create meaning and navigate life through the paths we make, as the paths we make. You're laying down the path as you're walking it. And there's a whole lot of analytic philosophy I could tell you about this idea, but I want to keep it at the level of everyday life because that's where we all live, even analytic philosophers and cognitive scientists. Just think about like an actual path through a forest. It doesn't exist before someone walks it. We make the path, or we fly the path if we're a bird or an insect or whatever. But once we make our way, we start to create this path, and it's real, and it changes what's possible for the next person who comes along, and also for us the next time we want to go to that same place. And different paths through the same forest can be completely different experiences, or even through the same landscape. Maybe in one area it's the desert, in another area it's the forest, but we end up at the same place. So reality is like this, if you can think of it in a little more multidimensional way. What we're doing here is opening meaning and sensual connection for one another. That is the point and the answer of all this. It really is where you're going to feel your best and give your best. And it happens best when we're not being judged, but we are allowed to be different and to experience contradiction and contrast. And instead of thinking there's some one way that's beautiful, for example, it's like exploring beauty as this reality that already is. Understanding we're not hallucinating, we're not making reality out of nothing, but it is ongoing that we're making it. We're making way literally. And reality is what we're making together and what we are. So there's no separation. It's uncontained. It's not contained. It's no beginning or end. And our language assumes that. Just by using language, we assume beginnings and ends. So that's why this is so hard to shift out of. But it doesn't mean our language always has to assume that. We can shift all of this together, even the representational nature of it. Part of doing this is learning to catch these habitual, dualistic, either or polarizing sort of scaffolds, not judging them, just noticing them. Most of which, were never our choice, by the way. We just sort of had to align with them in order to survive sometimes, but to go through the world in the way we were told to do it. But we began to think of these as paths instead. And then we began to understand all the ways we're made and the ways we've made are shaping and co-creating as more like lines and threads and paths and ways and moving but connected, never-ending movements that we can trace. We don't always trace them perfectly, and we can never trace them absolutely, but we can look at it like that. To be able to do that, there's a few kind of cues or keys, or let's call them cue keys, that I think about when I'm working with the Waymaking approach to all of this. And I want to just share those with you. Their orientation is one, sequencing or sequences is another, and the perspectival trajectory is another one. So these are just kind of ways that might be helpful for you if you want to begin to understand how to reimagine what's sensually and meaningfully possible in your connections with yourself and the world. Adds more like paths and layers of paths instead of either or choices all the time. And you just begin to notice the contradictions and contrasts and judgments as areas that are subject to change and actually could open you to a new sensuality and a new meaning that you're learning from yourself or someone else or just the life that you're part of. So the first one I said, I think, was orientation. And this is true of all different layers. Mostly I'm talking geographical layers here, but it's also true of the way we talk and the way we feel and so on. As some of you know, all of that's cognitive for me, but let's stick to this. So every single sentence or action from you or anyone who does anything to you is always oriented. It's always coming from somewhere, whether they know it or not, or we know it or not. It's angled, it's pointed, there's some kind of what we might call intention in philosophy, though that's a whole can of worms I won't open, but there's an orientation, even if it's not a purposeful orientation, even if it's chaotic. So if we're thinking of just in a room, you're always somewhere, and that can always be sort of measured as you're standing towards the north or the south or whatever system people use to assess these things, but you're somehow faced towards something. And this is in all kinds of different layers and spaces in life. So your orientation means you can only be in one time and space. And that means it's actually very generative because you've had a unique experience that you can share with others that no one else has had. but everything you encounter has had that too. So that means you also have these portals all around you all the time for new sensory experience and meaning, so much as you can handle it, because this isn't always easy. So we have to take it slow and be careful and find ways to handle this together. But it's true of just about everything. That's why we make movies and read books. That's why we write books. That's why we do philosophy and science, because we're excited by these potentials that we sense that are there, but that we don't know yet, or that we know, but we haven't put into representation. But we know them because we're so connected to everything, because we're inescapably part of all of this. The way we can fill into those is by making the path and walking into it together. So this orientation is generative. It's not a constrictive thing, even if it does constrict us. It's actually almost like a signal that we're giving to one another and to ourselves, which sort of holds within it a lot of this resonance of where we're coming from and where we want to go, and so on. So those two people at the corner are oriented in completely different ways. I don't even remember what I said now, but maybe one's oriented toward picking up their kids and the other one towards work, or something like this. But that's kind of what I'm talking about, and we can kind of sense that in one another before we even talk. And in the same way, we can sense a lot of other potential going on and possibilities. And when we communicate about this, we make it visible, representational, so that we can then have a little bit of agency about where or what new paths we want to lay. This orientation isn't about some kind of bias or something that we're going to dissolve. It's more about just noticing the poise of our life, where it's heading, the meaning and sensuality that's tied into that, and taking care with it, ourselves and others, caring for this. This is precious, actually. It's not about escaping your perspective or trying to crush somebody else's perspective. Those are really not helpful in terms of having exciting and an exciting and caring life, a life of meaning, let's say. But you can start to ask, how am I currently oriented right now? Like, what's my poise? What am I moving towards? What am I holding as my body? What is all this directed towards? It's just an interesting way to start to think about it. And it's a way to help you start to find habits that aren't about either or. Because when you're talking about orientation, you're not talking about something that's easily definable or an either or situation. The second key clue, or cube key, whatever I called it, is sequence. And this is really important because sequence implies that it's ongoing. And this is good to connect to the orientation, because orientation, we're almost taking like a little bit of a pause or a snapshot. But this is what I'm always talking about, is navigability, and the way you can like look back and trace how you've come into this orientation, what's led to it, whether it's your thoughts or whether it's your actual body and the movements that you've made. Those are both one process, but we sort of think of them a little bit differently so we can get a grasp of it. But you can really look back on this, and you can see that how you got here matters, and that it's still part of being here right now. You don't understand a path by looking at just one point, whether that's your path or another person's path that you're interacting with. So it's good to just, in general, understand this orientation is actually connected to this long tail, this long sequence for you, but for anyone you're interacting with. And all of that is creating that. So this order, this direction, it matters what you've experienced and when you've experienced it. Even if we've experienced the same thing, if you experienced it when you were 23 and I experienced it when I was 3, it probably had a really different shift on our orientation. So we might end up at the same conclusion, but maybe we've had completely different sequences. So actually, we're experiencing that conclusion very differently. And that's very important, something we take for granted often. We think we are talking about the same thing, and we are, but we're also experiencing it very differently. And we're missing the opportunity to expand meaning and potential for both of us if we don't notice that, because we usually shut down. So you might not be experiencing the reality that you share the same way. And this is kind of how meaning works. When we honor sequence, we stop trying to find some timeless, transcendent thing that's in all paths, because that doesn't even make sense. Because all the paths are different, unique experiences towards this meaning that we're co-creating together. So this opens your life, it opens your heart, it opens your mind, helps you enjoy a good movie or a good conversation or a good book if you start to think about it this way. You don't skip to the end. There is no end. And you can't ever find the beginning, actually, but you can get a lot of understanding about the sequence, about the orientation, about the life that's been lived, and about your own too. Those paths in the reality can literally be anything that we make together from all of that. So the third cue this brings up, or the key cue, is the one I'm calling perspectival trajectory. And that definitely has a lot to do with navigability. And we can start to get some vision here about the other two that we've been talking about and consider it through this bodily movement and this thinking, perspective, feeling all at once. So you're not just standing somewhere, you're always moving. Your perspective's never actually a fixed viewpoint, even though we look at it that way. So this trajectory is a word that tells you what you're doing is measuring this ongoing process that even includes that measurement and can never actually be absolutely represented or measured or mapped. So the trajectory is the best assessment and representation of it to yourself and to others that you can give in that moment. And it has momentum, it has orientation, it has direction, it has history, and this is rich and wonderful. But it's also just the best we can assess at that moment. It's always so much more to it than we can actually see. Itself is this awareness of the ongoing trajectory. But there's so much more to the body than just that. And we're trying to constantly sort of bring more into our focus and then also the making the path through doing that. And when we understand this, something shifts. We're not trying to eliminate perspective to reach some kind of pure objectivity place, but we're also not saying that there is no objectivity. We're not trying to dissolve these into one another. We're recognizing that perspectives are themselves movements through possibilities. And this opens other people's perspectives and it opens you and your own, while also realizing they're still grounded in that sequence, that trajectory, that history, that waymaking that you've been doing since you were born. So you're not just floating free suddenly. You still have all that. And it's still very meaningful and it needs to be shared. But you're co-creating this reality. And there's this real shared process that's not a hallucination and it cannot be fabricated. And it always shows itself. We can never hide it, unfortunately, and it never will dissolve exactly because there are no beginnings and ends, and all of this is not and never has been separated. So understanding this doesn't mean that all paths are equal. It just means paths are real and we're making them and we're co-creating them. And we're just one part of all of that in this ongoing process. So what changes when you approach philosophy or just everyday life with this approach is that you stop trying to escape your situated existence, but you don't think you'll ever get to some place that you'll see everything finished and final. That's not really the point. But you do start to see time and space differently as these paths and trajectories. And you start to let those sorts of beliefs and either or and all that fighting that goes with it hold a little less weight as you shift into a different way of dancing with it. It's not what it looks like right now, actually. The world starts to feel different and you experience it differently and you connect differently. And you can try this out. Just, watch a movie or read a book or have a conversation and just try to think of it this way. It's not easy, but you'll start to understand how you can start to see these multidimensional constellations of possibility. And you can even maybe switch your perspectives a little bit like a kaleidoscope, just to touch on some other things that we've thought about before. So, ask what sequence of experiences created this path, or what is making this orientation possible? Where is this trajectory heading? Those are the kind of questions you can start to ask. And then differences become interesting rather than threatening. And they're showing you other possible paths through the same landscape that you're co-creating. This applies to communities and societies too, and how we handle all these roads and paths that we're co-creating together. We're all path makers in a shared landscape, and we can learn from each other. We can see how our paths intersect. We can create new paths together. We don't need to dissolve differences, but we honor these paths and we begin to fill into them as part of the same landscape that is also co-creating us. And the world starts to kind of unfold through all these ways that we make. So think of those two people on that same corner with their different orientations and sequences. And it's not that they're in different worlds, but they each hold a portal to a path that could be the opening for the other if they find the place where those paths can communicate or touch. Reality is, this isn't because reality is subjective or objective, but they're making different ways as part of the same ongoing waymaking that's at so many layers and dimensions all at once. And that's how meaning happens if we let it. And this approach is just trying to highlight and open some ways of doing that. And many people are trying to do that. So I hope you'll keep a lookout for them. And thanks for being here. This is the last diary of the year. And I only said I'd do it till the end of the year. So maybe it's the last one, but I really appreciate you being here. And I'm still doing all these videos and conversations, but other people will be moderating and helping. So just wanted to let you know that. But I send you a lot of love and hope you're doing well. All right. Bye.